Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of our Justice and Pieces guest speaker series. Today, we are joined by Jessica. So, Jessica, first of all, thank you so much for taking the time and joining us today. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about your background.
Hi, JP. It's a pleasure to be here for sure. So, I started out as a lawyer, helping out employees and employers navigate legal issues when a lot was at stake. And I pivoted to the bar prep space as of last year, where now I help bar exam candidates pass the bar exam so that they can finally start lawyering on their schedule.
So, how did you get into the sort of bar exam space? What sort of motivated you to get out of practice or reduce your practice
Yeah.
and then do bar exam prep and how did that come about?
Yeah. It all started when I was doing my own bar prep back in 2021. So I am a visual learner. I also have ADHD, and I was struggling to get through the materials because they're very dense and very convoluted, and it was just overwhelming. Okay. And I had the idea then to work out something that would cater to visual students and ADHD students, right? In a way that just really simplified dense concepts. But I didn't move on it as, quick as the time that I wrote it. After about a year of practicing, I still had that nagging thought that, you know what, let me see what we can do to simplify it because it shouldn't be the case that if someone is a visual learner or neurodiverse, that they're going to have the difficulties that, other students who may not have those sorts of challenges, um, in passing the exam. And so I pivoted and I said, let me start that, let me bridge that gap for those students. And, after 1 year, here we are. We're serving students throughout each bar exam cycle, providing them with visual summaries, audio videos, or sorry, audio lessons, and whiteboard animation videos.
So maybe yeah, you can share with your experience there where you're mentioning again
Yeah,
having ADHD, visual needs. What was
yeah,
out there before? What did you use? And then why was that not catering to what you needed? And what have you
yeah,
done taken from that in incorporating into your preparation?
yeah. I was not able to find anything similar. So, mind you, this is back in 2021 when I did the bar exams. There wasn't anything like that. There were some summaries that one provider was offering, but even when I saw those summaries, they weren't really like true summaries to me. It was more or less like annotated, detailed table of contents is how I took it. And so I was like, I still have to like go through the materials and all of that. And I was struggling too because, classic ADHD just takes longer to get through things because we sort of really, really hyper focus on certain parts of the materials more than we should instead of looking at, the broader view at times. And it just wasn't engaging. Like it was somewhat dreadful to go through it, even though it was very vital, important information we needed to know for the exam. But I struggled. I really struggled with it. And so, being that there wasn't any resource out there that was making the law more engaging, more understandable, digestible for people like me, because I knew there were, others like me as well who were going through those same struggles. I put my mind to it that, okay, we're going to start this out. And that's how Simply Law was born.
Okay, so you got this idea. You said, look, this wasn't there. I didn't have these resources, so I'm going to start Simply
Yeah.
Lost. What kind of did you do? What maybe you can tell us about some of your strategies and you mentioned audio and whiteboard video. So can you go into
Mhm.
some detail about kind of the resources you have?
Yeah, for sure. Okay. So with our whiteboard animations, we basically bring the abstract into picture, into life, right? So we'll go over particular subjects. So, for example, when it comes to estate planning, we'll talk about intestate distribution. We'll talk about the involuntary bankruptcy process, right? So, just various subjects that are really hard for students to get a good handle of. We will do a video for it just to at least streamline the comprehension process, and then students have fun taking in the information while also learning something that's very important. So we've got that on one hand. We also have the audio lessons because we don't want students to feel like they have to be chained to their desk throughout the whole bar prep period, right? So people have stuff to do. Maybe they're going to work. Maybe they have to run errands and such. So we don't want them to at least, miss a beat in their prep. So we came out with the audio lessons so that they can listen on the go, right? And of course, our visual summaries, those also include cartoonish figures in there and different charts and imagery to really cement those concepts, right? So that students are able to recall on, oh yeah, I remember seeing that figure when I was reading through that lesson, and then it broke it down in this way. So for me, it was a simpler way that we can at least express and communicate these very difficult concepts in a way that even someone who's not in law could understand.
Now, with the barrister exams, I think coming up November 11th, and then the solicitors a couple weeks later,
Yeah.
um, if somebody came to you, I mean, maybe you can actually first start by explaining sort of the process and if somebody is interested in getting prepped by you, how it all works. But
Yeah.
what would be perhaps, an 8-week timeline of what you're doing and advice you would share for a law student who's getting ready to like write their exams, either one or both, in November?
Okay. First things first, have a schedule in place. So I always recommend that students break up their schedule into thirds. The first two thirds, spend that on really like digesting the information, reading the information, as well as doing practice questions in between the readings of each subject area. Then in the last one third, spend that time doing practice questions, practice exams, and then review, and then put that on repeat. And that will at least give you that structure in place because a lot of the time when I do talk to students, um, they'll have a schedule idea in their mind, but it's not really on paper and it's not even written all the way to exam day, right? And so I find that the students who are able to stay on track and really be accountable to their reading goals have a structure in place that they can refer to. So that's one thing. Second thing is not to feel the need to rush through your readings for the sake of saying that, hey, I was able to, read this subject area in X amount of days. The important piece is building comprehension. The exam is open book, right? They know that, we know that. And so, what it really comes down to is being able to understand the concept so well that you will be able to tackle whatever question that the LSO throws at you, right? You won't be able to just flip to your book and then be able to find the answer on page, 220 for at least the majority of the questions on the exam. It just doesn't work that way. And unfortunately, because it is a timed exam, we just don't even have time to be like referring to our materials, flipping through it for every question. So I would say, make sure to build your understanding, your comprehension of the subject upfront so that later on you're just doing practice, you're just doing review, and then also on the day of the exam, you're not heavily reliant on flipping through your materials because again, there's not much time. And because of the way the questions are drafted, it's really testing your critical thinking skills. So, you need to understand the stuff very well enough to be able to manage through those questions.
And what do you think are some of the challenges in particular when you work with students, that they come into with an expectation of what to do on the licensing exam, right? So you mentioned, for example, it's open book, it's multiple choice, right? 160 questions, I believe, 4.5 hours.
Yeah.
Um, and I also have paralegal students that I help prep for their exam, which is identical. They're literally written at the same building at the same time as the
Yeah.
barristers. And some of the things that students struggle with is that it is an open book exam, it is timed.
Yeah.
What do you find that's different for example, for law students who
Mhm.
have different structures in their exams in law school when
Mhm.
they come into this exam, and what kind of catch them off guard?
Number one, there's advice that, unfortunately, some students will very much latch onto, where, they think just having a good index, for example, will be the answer to passing the exam because it's open book. You just need to find the answer. So tying into what I was just saying previously, because the exam is testing us on our critical thinking skills, our analytical skills, we need to go beyond the surface when we're doing our readings, right? And not take it so lightly that it's something that, okay, well, it's open book, it's easy, I can just, use an index. So that is one thing I would say is something that I hear from students. And as soon as I hear it, I'm like, okay, here's what, I think we should tweak so that going forward, this advice doesn't cause more harm than good. Um, Another thing that I would say is that students, they may not, like I was saying, they may think that, okay, if I just do certain practice questions from here and I'm scoring like 80% on this practice question, then I'm going to also score 80%, or I'm going to, rank pretty high on there. But no practice question will directly, emulate what you'll see on exam day. And so it's very important not to have that misconception that if you're scoring very high with one exam, that those are the type of questions that you're going to see. Because I've had students who unfortunately, had failed beforehand, and they would say, I don't know what went wrong. I did the exam, I was scoring my high 80s, but then I failed on exam day, right? And so it's very important not to depend solely on even one practice exam provider. Do a bunch of practice questions from different exam providers so that you'll be able to see, where exactly you really are in terms of your skill and your performance, and your reasoning as well, because each exam provider may have, different question stems that will, test the concepts.
And so how to utilize, so you mentioned exam prep questions, and I know certainly in the barrister and solicitor space there's a lot more companies that do put out practice questions. I mean, nowadays I think even students try to use ChatGPT or something to come up with practice questions in addition to what the law study provides. But how would you know, to what you were just saying, maybe to echo that point, how should students be sort of working in practice questions into their exam prep?
Yeah, I would say after they finish reading a particular subject area, then do practice questions for that particular area, because doing so early on instead of like down the road will help you to quickly identify any knowledge gaps you have, right? So that you'll know right then and there, do I need to go back and review, certain concepts in civil litigation, for example, or maybe professional responsibility, right? And so that would be one of the ways to incorporate it. So during that first two-thirds period where you're doing your readings, and then after the readings, doing practice questions. Secondly, in that last one-third period of your bar prep schedule, to be doing practice questions on repeat, timed practice questions at that.
That's great because I often find people buy, some of these practice questions and they don't time it, right? So then
Yeah.
mentally they train themselves. Oh yeah, I did this quite. I got like 100% or 95%, but I
Yeah.
actually spent 8 hours doing them. And now when you get to
Yeah.
the real exam, you have half that time and you're like racing against
Right?
it. So how do you deal with that? I mean, especially as you're saying, there are people who are, with ADHD or otherwise. And actually, maybe before you even get into this, you can talk about for those who may need accommodations, how that process goes. Um,
Yeah.
share about that, and then I guess the second part to it is how do you manage that time when you only have 4.5 hours to do 160 questions? And I mean, if you don't finish, the chances are the success of passing goes significantly down because
Mhm.
you do 130 questions and you guess C's all the way down for the last 30, hopefully unless you got 120 out of 130, you're not looking at a good chance of passing.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. So when it comes to accommodations, of course, everyone is going to be different, right? We've worked with students who have ADHD, and I've seen them get accommodations from 25% extra time to even, 50% extra time, right? Also, sometimes having their own private room to answer questions in, right? Or even having, for example, two monitors available, one that has the exam questions, and then another where they can pull up all their resources. So the study materials, as well as any, charts or just any notes that they have. So accommodations will look so different from case to case. And the LSO website will have all the directions on there for students, right? Knowing exactly what type of medical documentation they need to submit. So if a student is out there who believes that, hey, I believe I could benefit from accommodations based on my disability, right? Then definitely, check out the site and then look at the instructions, what's needed. And then, also keep in mind that there are deadlines as well in terms of the submission of those documents. So the earlier, the better. When it comes to timing, how to manage it, because again, there's only 4.5 hours that students have. I would say have that timer sheet. Have it with you. If you're able to refer to it every 8 to 10 questions, that would be great because then you'll be able to see, like, hey, okay, 20 minutes has passed. I should be on X question. If I'm not, then I need to change my approach quick because I need to make sure I finish the rest of these questions in time, right? Unfortunately, sometimes students are unable to finish maybe 20 questions, maybe even like 30 questions because they spent a lot of their time up front, right? And sometimes it's not even about it being a very hard question. Of course, there are some in there, but sometimes it's just that it's an easy question and they know it's easy, but they just want to double check their study materials to make sure that they're, right on with it. And so I totally get it. Sometimes we need that confidence boost to make us feel like, okay, we are on track. But then that's also like a time trap that could be used for those more difficult questions. When it comes to practice exams, though, when you're doing the timed and untimed questions, I would recommend doing untimed questions in the beginning phase. So in that first two-thirds period that I was referring to, mainly because we want to really build on our understanding of those concepts first before we bring in the time component. Once we've sorted that out and we're, really solid on those concepts, then we can move over to the timed questions, right? I find a lot of the time that, when students reach out to me, they'll be like, Jess, I ran out of time. I only had, 10 minutes left, but then I had to answer like 40 questions or, something so crazy. And I'm like, okay, what do you think it was? And, they'll just let me know. I think it was just the timing. But sometimes when you really dig deep, it's the problem is related to the comprehension piece because when we know under something very well, we understand it very well, we're able to see through the distractors in the answer choices quicker, the distractors and the fact scenario quicker, and it just ties everything in together so that we're able to improve our speed, right? So that's why I always say Focus first on the comprehension piece because that will affect everything else, including timing later on.
So on that, I mean, there's a number of strategies there you've mentioned throughout here, but I
Yeah,
often have, I mean, it's the same kind of structure for paralegals writing their paralegal licensing exam. So whether they're paralegal students doing the P1 licensing exam or law students doing the barrister or solicitor, what are some other strategies then on exam day that you would suggest? I mean, even just walking into the building, sometimes, it's like airport security with the things you can bring and not bring. So
right.
you have people who are in your group and you're like, look, the exam's coming next Tuesday. Here are some last minute things to help guide you in terms of, now, obviously you're mentioning timing here, but anything
Mhm.
else that can connect from where you've left off in that 1/3 to exam day?
Yeah, so definitely when you're going through the practice questions. So you're asking from that 1/3 to exam day period before the exam? Okay. So I would say definitely when you're going through your questions, triage the questions. So I always recommend start off with the easiest questions that you see. So when you are going through your questions, whether it's online or, maybe you've got a booklet, spend a few moments looking at the question, seeing if it's something that you can answer right away. If so, answer it. So let's say you went through question one, it's an easy one for you, go ahead. Question two, you're like, okay, this is something that I'm going to have to look up. I may have an idea of where it could be located. Whatever the case is, it's not something you can answer right away. You can, have like a little mark to come back to it that symbolizes that it's, maybe on the medium difficulty scale, right? Put the mark on. Go to question three. Question three, very difficult one. Have your little mark on for the very difficult ones. Question four, easy. Okay, answer. Now you're just spending a few seconds looking at each question to gauge its difficulty level because the goal is to get as many points as you can, right? And so all points are the same. Try to get the easiest ones while you can. And then after you finish going through a particular subject area, so let's say it's civil litigation, and you finish answering the easy questions, then come back again and then now answer the, medium difficulty questions before you answer the very difficult questions. So I would recommend number one, triaging it from that point in time. And number two, if you can practice with a shortened time limit. So for those writing the bar exams, they have 1 minute and 40 seconds to answer each question, right? So I recommend if you can have timed conditions of 1 minute and 30 seconds and keep practicing with that, that will at least give you some buffer by exam days so that when the nerves start to kick in, at least, you've been trained to answer it within that 1 minute and 30 seconds. Another thing too is not to get hung up on those difficult questions. If you find that it's difficult, let it go. I know like a lot of us will have that urge to like find the answer and figure this thing out, which is great in real life practice. But because we're writing a timed exam, it just it's not worth it for us. And so the best thing to do is just, skip and then move on to other questions that are easier for you to answer.
And on questions itself, right? I mean,
Yeah,
sometimes you get these very long fact scenarios and you're lost in the scenario, kind of what's going to be asked here.
yeah,
Are there any strategies for these? Like, and sometimes now they have, I think, grouped questions, right? So they'll have a very long scenario, let's like a page, and then there'll
yeah.
be 3 or 4 questions related to that. Any strategies for those particular questions? Because that's where I think a lot of students are like, how do I tackle these kinds of questions?
Yes, I know. Those can be annoying to get. I would say first, read the question stem. So the question of the actual question, okay? Read the question stem to first figure out what is it that they're asking me. And that will orient our minds to, okay, when I'm reading the fact pattern, this is the information that they need me to answer. So I'm going to, have that tunnel vision and look at that. And everything else that's irrelevant, I can't bring it into my, analysis process. So looking at the question stem first, and right after looking at the question stem, Spend just a few seconds looking at the answer choices and see if there's anything that we can eliminate right off the bat. Some questions stem so they may not give us enough context to be able to eliminate some of the answer choices. But for those that do, if you can, definitely eliminate it before going back to the top and reading the entire fact scenario. What I would also say is to annotate the fact pattern as well. So figure out who the key players are, right? Figure out what actions, key player X did or what key player Y did, right? And just have everything sorted out because those very long fact scenarios can be quite confusing. So if you're able to sort of, extract from it the crucial details to answer that question, that will help you, stay on track and then not have to reread and then spend more time on the question.
Now, just I want to go kind of go back. So I got a question here about
Yeah.
organizing your material. So let's now rewind, like my records here on the in the background,
Yeah.
back to the beginning. So again, the exam's about 6, 7 weeks from now. Some
Yeah.
people have just got their materials, and they're looking at how should I organize these materials, right? Should I be putting them in one binder, in two binders, in six binders, if there's six areas? I mean, I know the
Yeah.
bears listeners might be a little different in terms of sections, but what would you recommend? And maybe generally, and then more specifically, from your own experience for people who are more visual, how can you kind of organize some of those visual aids that you mentioned into your materials you're going to bring into the exam?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Okay, so generally I recommend binding or perhaps even putting in a binder each subject area separately. So that way you don't go in with like a huge booklet there where it's just like tough to go through. So if you can separate it, that would be great. And at the front of each booklet, if you can also have the detailed table of contents for that particular subject, that would be very helpful because then when you're working on that subject area on the day of the exam, at least you have the detailed table of contents right there. When it comes to the visual aspect, especially for visual learners or even those with ADHD or other form of neurodiversity, they can highlight or color code the detailed table of contents. So that's something that I personally did for my exams. I had the detailed table of contents that were not only color coded, so I would have one color for one heading and then different colors for each subsequent subheading. But I would also have different phrases and different keywords underneath each in color as well, so that when I would be, in a rush, my eyes could just really narrow in and focus on what I needed to focus on. Because right now it comes in black ink, right? So everything just meshes together. And when you're in a hurry, that's the last thing you want. You need stuff to stand out to you. So I would recommend if you can color code it. I would also recommend having tabs as well. And in terms of like charts or any additional aids, right, that students may use, I would have that in a separate booklet. So you have your subject materials in one booklet, and then everything else related to that subject, I would have in its own booklet or binder.
And I guess related that you mentioned highlighting is in the actual materials
Mhm.
have a multicolored highlighting system of sorts, if that's
Yeah,
you in terms of organizing, well, this yellow means this, green means this, so forth, or
yeah.
a system that you use in particular.
It is, but I find that students really hyper focus on the highlighting piece. And what I normally tell them is the most important thing is that you're annotating it in a way that makes sense to you, right? So someone can get really good at highlighting, dates or definitions or exceptions and such, but they may not be really, really digesting what they're reading. Okay. So I don't get me wrong, I don't have anything against highlighting, but I will say I prioritize what that student is reading or understanding more than if they've got the perfect highlighting system. Before highlighting, though, I recommend to finish reading, that page or that section first before going in with your highlights or annotations, right? Because then it forces our mind to really distill it down to the key concepts that we need to know.
That's great. And I think one of the things that kind of came out there,
Mhm.
that whether it's you or me or, there's plenty of other of our colleagues that have, tips that we've shared with other students.
Yeah,
Somebody might be listening and they're like, well, I never thought to do it that way. I'm a hyper-focused highlighter, and now maybe I should just throw my highlighters out because Jessica's saying something different. I think you touched on it that, everyone's different. And what can
yeah.
you kind of emphasize in terms of, keeping sort of your individual focus?
Sorry, say that again. I couldn't hear that
Sorry,
clearly.
I would say, like, for people who have, their individual traits, if you're, like you said, a visual, you're going to want to
Yeah,
use charts. But if I'm, kinesthetic,
yeah,
those charts aren't going to be very helpful for me. So how do you
yeah,
kind of resist the urge to kind of go in this echo chamber of, well, these people are writing the exam and they told me to do it this way, but
yeah.
that's not for me.
Yeah, stick with what works best for you. At the end of the day, you'll hear strategies and insights from various people. And if something sticks very well with who you know or understand to be as a learner, then by all means, try it out, right? And don't also be afraid to let go of something. If you find that it's not working for you, it's fine, right? There's definitely other ways that, or other things that you can adopt that could work best for you. Because, like you said, you could have someone who is more of a visual learner, then you have someone who's more of an auditory learner, right? Someone who likes highlighting, someone who just, they have blank pages, no highlights, they don't need it, right? So stick with what works best for you because we know ourselves best. We know what has worked for us throughout our studies. So, stick with that and that should not let you down.
Now again, on that point in terms of the preparation there, we've looked at tabs, we've looked at um, organizing your materials, charts, summaries, things like that. But one of the things that
Yeah.
do come up is, there's a bunch of different resources, but third parties in terms of, we talked about the practice questions, but things
Mhm.
like an index, right? Now I remember when I was, many almost 20 years ago, it seems, in law school, not quite actually, I don't want to date myself too much, but I remember
Okay.
when you'd get the index from like the previous year, somebody would kind of touch it up. I think U of T had this like index that a bunch of people worked on.
Yeah.
So it's simply just paying the donation. I don't know if those still exist, but paying
The
that, and
UFC indices still exist. Yeah.
so you get that, you buy it, you submit something, and you're like, let me just print this out, and away I go.
But I should mention that they are free.
Okay, so
Yeah.
that's good. So you get a free copy of this index. You print it out. You bring it to your barrister or solicitor exam. Is that something that will work, or what do you need to do beyond that, if anything, if you want to rely on that index?
Definitely incorporate it into your prep, right? So when you're doing those practice questions, you want to be using the material. So I always tell students when you're going through practice questions, make sure you're doing it in testing conditions, just like you would on exam day. So that means using the materials that you plan to use on exam day. Exam day should not be the first day that you're now whipping out your index, right? So while you're going through the practice questions, use the index, make it your own as well. If you find that there's a keyword that you would like in there that wasn't, then write it in, right? Because everyone is so different when it comes to how they would describe a particular rule or principle or concept, right? Or even the phrases that they would use. So if it's a phrase that is not something that your mind would have instinctively gone to, then add in that keyword that makes sense to you because on exam day, we want everything to be as streamlined as possible because the time is ticking. You don't have time to play around.
Now, Jessica, I guess maybe to summarize here, uh,
Yeah,
the solicitor exam is coming up in
yeah,
November. If people want to work with you, they're listening to this and like, oh, these are all great tips. I would love to get whiteboard material and other strategies there with Jessica. What can they do
yeah.
to find out more information?
Yeah. Well, they can definitely reach out to me via our website, via LinkedIn. We're also on Instagram. If they want to chat and get a personalized assessment of, how we can improve their bar prep. Of course, on our website, we have all our offerings on there. So as you mentioned, our whiteboard animations, our audio lessons, our visual summaries, and of course, our bar exam charts, which are very handy on the day of exam, so that you're not, flipping through pages just to find information. Everything is organized for you in our handy charts. So students would be able to, go through the website, see what we have to offer, and see what other students have experienced after using our materials.
Perfect. And I guess perhaps if you have the website handy, you can share the link here. I can put it obviously in writing.
Yeah. So if you go to www.simplylaw, that is spelled simplilaw.ca.
Perfect. So, Jessica, do you have any final words of wisdom for, either a barrister or either law students writing the
Mhm.
barrister or solicitor exam, or like we've talked about a lot of these tips, which are great because I echo actually anyone listening is going to be like, oh, JP mentioned those same points. So it's always great to have somebody backing a lot of it up. But
Yay.
for anyone writing a law society licensing exam later this year, or whenever they come across this interview, any final words you'd like to add to all the great advice you've shared with us today?
Yeah, of course. I would say number one, you can definitely make it happen. You did not come this far only to come this far. You have the intelligence needed to pass these exams, right? It just takes, buckling down, going through your readings, going through practice, right? Fine-tuning your approach, ditching any bad habits, bad test taking habits or strategies, and really making sure that when you are doing practice, you're doing so under timed conditions so that you're priming yourself for exam day. I know we're about 2 months away, a little bit less than 2 months away from the exam. And so if anyone is just starting or even about to start their bar prep, there is still time. Of course, if you find that you don't think you'll be able to, get through the readings as well as you would like to in that time, you can always consider perhaps writing it at a different sitting, right? And go according to your timeline. This is another big thing. Sometimes we might feel the urge or feel rushed to write at a certain sitting because everyone else is doing so. Maybe your friends from school are doing so, and you don't want to be the one that's left behind, right? And so you just say, okay, well, I'm just gonna write it, right? But if you don't really feel ready to do so, that's totally okay. Go according to your timeline, and everything will work out for you when it should.
Perfect. So thanks so much, Jessica, for taking the time and talking to us today. Thanks for everyone for
Yeah.
tuning in. Wish you all the best on your licensing exam prep, and Jessica
Yes.
helping people get through that. I don't know if it was the same for the barristers, but a couple of days ago, the paralegal licensing exam results came out on Friday, and I got flooded with the messages of no, thank you so much for helping me pass. I mean, there's also
Yay.
people who didn't, and that's why I think what you're saying, the timing is, it just means not right now, right? It's not a reflection of who you are. You can come back and write it in November or February. So I think all these are great pieces of advice, and thanks again for everything. Take care.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on, JP. And all the best to everyone listening and writing the exams this November or in a later sitting.
Perfect. Bye again.
Bye.